Get out of my seat before I have you dragged off this aircraft in handcuffs." The words did not come from a stranger shouting across a parking lot. They came from a flight attendant standing 18 inches from a paying passenger's face. Inside a cabin that sold fresh coffee and leather polish, while 40 other people pretended not to watch, Marcus Holloway did not move. He simply looked up from the folder in his lap and said, "Before you do that, you should know exactly whose name is on this ticket." Nobody in that cabin, including the woman giving the order, understood yet how much that sentence would cost her. To understand how a boarding gate in Charlotte, North Carolina turned into the beginning of the end of someone's career, you have to go back 9 hours to a kitchen that smelled like burnt toast and old coffee in a brick house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood where the porch light never quite worked right. At 5:19 that morning, Marcus Holloway stood at his kitchen counter in a gray t-shirt and sweatpants, reading the same paragraph of a speech for the 4th time. The cursor blinked at him like it was losing patience. He was 61 years old, retired 2 years now from a career that had taken him from a ROTC scholarship at a state school nobody outside the state had heard of, to command of an air mobility wing, to a star on each shoulder that had taken him 28 years to earn and had never once made getting a taxi in the rain any easier. Tomorrow he was supposed to stand in front of 600 people at the Pacific Northwest Aviation Leadership Summit in Seattle and talk about the one subject that had defined his entire professional life. How good people make bad decisions when they mistake a feeling for a fact. He deleted the opening paragraph. Too soft. He typed a new one. Too angry. He deleted that too. On the counter beside his laptop sat a small silver coin, its edges worn smooth by 40 years of thumbs. One side showed a set of wings. The other side, if you tilted it toward the light, still carried 6 engraved words, half erased by time. Judge the act, not the man. It had belonged to his father, Elijah Holloway, who had spent 31 years as an aircraft mechanic at a regional airport outside Richmond, and had trained 4 different men who went on to become his supervisor while he never did. Elijah did not talk about it often. When he did, it was never with anger. The day Marcus left for officer training, his father had pressed the coin into his palm and said, "A uniform tells people what rank you carry. It doesn't tell them one thing about your character. Don't ever let anybody confuse the two, and don't you dare do it to somebody else." Marcus had carried that coin through 2 deployments, one promotion board that almost didn't go his way, and a retirement ceremony where his father, 83 years old by then, had sat in the 2nd row and cried without trying to hide it. He put the coin in his jacket pocket and finished the speech an hour later than he'd wanted to. He would present it as he always did, without rank, without a uniform, in a plain charcoal jacket and a pair of shoes that had seen better decades. He preferred rooms where nobody knew who he was, until the facts made it impossible to ignore. At the gate for Meridian Coast Airlines Flight 482, non-stop from Charlotte to Seattle, the terminal buzzed with the particular restlessness of a 6 a.m. departure. Marcus arrived with 20 minutes to spare, boarding pass already loaded on his phone. He had bought seat 2A 5 weeks earlier, paid in full, no upgrade, no status shortcut, just a man who liked window seats and had learned long ago to buy them early. The gate agent glanced at him, at the plain jacket and the worn leather bag over his shoulder, and pointed toward the far end of the line without lifting the scanner. "General boarding is back there, sir." Marcus held his phone under the reader anyway. The screen blinked green. Seat 2A, first class. The agent's expression rearranged itself in half a second. "Oh, Mr. Holloway, my apologies. Go right ahead." He said nothing about it. He never did. It was the kind of vanished from the record the instant it happened. The kind no camera would ever catch. The kind that left no bruise if except the private, familiar ache of being doubted first. and believed only after the proof arrived. 2 minutes later, a man in a navy suit with a leather portfolio tucked under one arm walked up to the same podium. The agent brightened immediately. "Mr. Yates, good morning. Is the Seattle deal still moving forward?" She waved him through without asking for anything at all. His name, apparently, was proof enough. Marcus watched from the jet bridge doorway, filing the moment away the way he'd been trained to file every moment. Not with resentment, but with the clean, clinical attention of a man who had spent 3 decades of his life sitting on review boards, deciding whose story got believed and whose got explained away. The first-class cabin of Flight 482 held 8 seats, 4 rows of soft gray leather, warm overhead lighting, and the low hush of a space that wanted you to feel like you belonged there. Marcus settled into 2A, stowed his bag, and set 2 things on the fold-down table beside his laptop, his phone, and the small silver coin. The lead flight attendant working that cabin was a woman named Vanessa Cole, 34 years old, 12 years with the airline, a face that could turn warm or cold in less time than it took to blink, depending entirely on who was standing in front of her. She took his boarding pass first, scanned the seat number, then looked at him for a beat longer than the scan required. "Was this seat issued through an upgrade?" "No," Marcus said. "I bought it 5 weeks ago." She studied the screen again, then studied him. The plain jacket, the scuffed leather bag, the absence of anything that announced money or rank, as if one of those details might yet reveal an error the system had somehow missed. "And you booked it yourself?" "Personally?" "Yes." She handed the pass back with a smile that arrived about half a second too late to look natural, and moved on. Marcus opened his laptop but did not touch the keyboard. He had learned, across 2 evacuation operations and more personnel reviews than he wanted to remember, that the questions people asked before there was any reason to ask them usually told you more than the questions themselves. Preston Yates boarded 4 minutes later and was seated across the aisle in 2C. Vanessa's entire posture changed the moment she saw him. "Mr. Yates, sparkling water with lime, the usual?" He smiled, already pulling out his laptop. "You remember. Is the merger call still at 10? Moved up to 9, actually. The board wants it wrapped before the West Coast wakes up." She laughed, warm and easy, and hurried off to get his water before he'd even ask twice. Yates opened his laptop, pressed the tray table down, and it gave a soft, unstable wobble. He tried the seat's power outlet. Nothing. He pressed the attendant call button. Vanessa appeared instantly. "The table's loose and the outlet's dead," Yates said, frustration edging into his voice. "I've got 4 hours of work before we land. I am so sorry, Mr. Yates. Let me find you something better." A younger flight attendant, Renee Alvarez, 26 years old and 8 months into the job, stepped over with a portable charging pack already in her hand. "We've got battery packs in the galley, and maintenance can secure that latch before we push back. It'll take 2 minutes. Vanessa didn't even look at her. Her eyes had already crossed the aisle and landed on 2A, on the quiet man reading through his speech, with a small silver coin resting near his elbow. "He's traveling alone," she said, half to herself. "He can go anywhere." Renee frowned. "Why him specifically?" "Working outlet, stable table, plenty of room," Vanessa said. "Mr. Yates represents significant revenue for this airline. We minimize disruption for a passenger like that." "He's already disrupted," Renee said carefully. "The disruption is the outlet. Moving another passenger doesn't fix that. It just moves it onto somebody who didn't do anything." Vanessa didn't answer. She opened the service tablet, scrolled to seat 2A, and before she had said a single word to Marcus Holloway, before she had asked him a single question, her thumb tapped a field on the screen. "Voluntary premium reassignment, pending passenger confirmation." Renee stared at the timestamp stamped automatically into the corner of the entry. "He hasn't agreed to anything." "He will," Vanessa said, already walking toward row 2. Go check on the galley, Renee. I've got this cabin. Vanessa stopped beside 2A, with the pleasant, practiced expression of someone about to offer a request and call it a courtesy. Mr. Holloway, we've got a situation with one of our top-tier customers, and I need to make an adjustment. We'll get you resituated and take care of you with a travel credit. Marcus set his tablet down slowly. Is there a mechanical issue with this seat? No. A weight and balance requirement? No. A safety concern? Her smile thinned by exactly 1 degree. This is a service decision, sir. Did you ask for volunteers in the cabin? There's no time to negotiate with everyone. Then why can't Mr. Yates use the battery pack your colleague just offered, while maintenance secures the latch before we push back? Something in Vanessa's face tightened, the way a hand tightens right before it becomes a fist. His work requires stability and continuous power. That creates a need the crew is authorized to resolve. It creates a need, Marcus said quietly, not a requirement that it be resolved using my seat. He had heard this exact shift in language before, in another life, in rooms with far higher stakes than an airplane cabin. The moment a preference got repackaged as an operational necessity, the moment a simple question started to be treated like defiance, the words changed first. The consequences always followed. I'll need to verify how this ticket was issued, Vanessa said, holding out her hand. Identification, please. He had already shown it at the gate. He handed it over anyway. She studied it far longer than the situation required, glanced at her tablet, then asked. Again, whether the seat had come from a complimentary upgrade or a standby assignment. Across the aisle, a man lowered his newspaper. 2 rows back, a college student named Maya Chen quietly angled her phone toward the exchange, thumb hovering over the record button. Marcus opened the confirmation email on his own phone and set it beside his boarding pass without a word. Purchase date, fare class, seat selection, all of it, right there. Vanessa did not touch the screen. I'll need to verify the account information. Why? Standard procedure. For whom? Marcus asked. Did you ask Mr. Yates for identification? A purchase receipt, proof his seat wasn't an upgrade. Her jaw set. Sir, please don't make this difficult. I'm not the one making it difficult. I'm asking you to apply the same standard twice. The temperature of the cabin seemed to drop by 10 degrees, though nothing in the air had actually changed. Vanessa's thumb moved across her tablet, and Marcus saw, just for a second, before she angled the screen away, 3 words appear on the entry log, passenger becoming confrontational. He felt something cold settle behind his ribs, not surprise, something closer to recognition, the specific, sickening familiarity of watching a lie get typed in real time. Describe the action, he said, his voice never rising. Don't replace an action with your own discomfort. You are challenging a crew member in the middle of boarding. I am asking why a valid ticket only becomes insufficient once I'm the one holding it. The cabin had gone very quiet. Not silent. The air vents still hummed. A bin closed somewhere near the back, but nobody within earshot was doing anything else anymore. Vanessa lowered her voice, but not so far that the nearest rows couldn't still hear every word. You can move voluntarily, she said. Or, I call this in as a compliance issue and have security waiting when we land at the gate, assuming we don't remove you before we ever leave it. It was the kind of sentence built to trap a man no matter what he did next. Standing could be called aggressive. Staying seated could be blamed for the delay. Marcus felt his thumb brush against the coin in his pocket. Judge the act, not the man. He breathed once, slow, deliberate, and unbuckled his seatbelt. I am complying under protest, he said, loud enough for the row behind him to hear clearly. Record those exact words. Vanessa said nothing. She did not write them down. She simply gestured toward the back of the plane, as though the matter had already been settled cleanly, and turned to walk him there herself, in full view of every passenger who had, by now, stopped pretending to look elsewhere. The walk from row 2 to row 31, felt longer than the length of the aircraft. Marcus carried his own bag, refusing to give her any sudden movement she could later twist into something else on that tablet. Passengers pulled their knees in as he passed. A woman in row 6 pressed her lips together, like she was holding back words she'd later regret not saying out loud. Maya Chen kept her phone low against her chest, steady, recording every step. They reached the back galley, where the air already smelled faintly of disinfectant from the lavatory door beside the last row. Seat 31C did not recline. The overhead bins were full. When Vanessa saw the size of his leather bag, she reached for it. "We'll need to check that below. It has my laptop and my speech notes in it. There's no room up here." Renee appeared from the galley out of breath, having clearly hurried the length of the plane. "There's space in the bin above row 29. I can secure it myself." Vanessa's mouth flattened, but she let go of the strap. Marcus lowered himself into the seat, knees pressed nearly against the row ahead, and buckled the belt without a word of protest beyond the 4 he had already said. Vanessa watched only long enough to confirm the belt was fastened, then turned and walked back toward first class without another glance. Without compensation offered, without any acknowledgement that a man had just said, in front of a full cabin, that he was complying under protest. A few minutes later, Renee returned quietly. With a bottle of water she set on his tray without being asked. "I'm sorry," she said, barely above a whisper. "You don't owe me an apology for someone else's decision," Marcus said. "I should have said more." Her eyes were bright, the particular brightness of someone fighting the urge to cry from anger rather than sadness. "Now tell me," Marcus said gently, "what does the record actually say happened?" Renee opened the service tablet with hands that weren't entirely steady, scrolled to seat 2A, and went pale. Passenger voluntarily accepted reassignment to support premium service recovery. Below it, passenger initially confrontational, then agreed to cooperate. She checked the timestamp. Her stomach dropped. "This says you volunteered 3 minutes before she ever spoke to you," Renee whispered. "I didn't volunteer anything. It says you agreed before she even asked." Marcus absorbed that without visible surprise. The lie itself didn't shock him. Its precision did. Vanessa hadn't simply moved him. She had pre-written a version of the event in which he had helped her do it, and she had done it before she'd said a single word to his face. Through the gap between the curtain and the galley wall, Renee watched another flight attendant deliver a battery pack directly to Preston Yates in seat 2A. The very seat Marcus had paid for, the very solution that had existed the entire time. Yates plugged in and kept working, without a second thought about who had made room for him. Renee found Vanessa near the forward galley a few minutes later, checking inventory as though the cabin had already returned to normal. "The record says he volunteered before you approached him," she said quietly. "That timestamp is 3 minutes early. You shouldn't be reviewing entries outside your section. You also wrote that he became confrontational. He never raised his voice." Not once. Vanessa turned, and whatever warmth she'd shown Yates minutes earlier was completely gone. "You're new enough to still be confusing your own discomfort with somebody else's misconduct." "I saw what happened. You saw part of it." Vanessa stepped closer, voice dropping beneath the ambient cabin noise. "Don't torch your career over a passenger who was going to file a complaint, no matter what we did. Think about your schedule. Think about your route bids. Think about who signs off on your evaluations." It was not phrased as a threat. It landed like one anyway. Renee thought about her student loans. She thought about her mother's rent, due on the 3rd of every month without fail. For a moment, fear made silence feel almost responsible. Then she looked through the curtain toward the back of the plane, where a 61-year-old man sat with his knees against the seatback in front of him, smoothing the bent corner of a page from his speech, with 2 careful fingers, saying nothing, demanding nothing, performing nothing, for the phones aimed his way. He was not calling a lawyer. He was not threatening anyone. He was simply restoring order to his own papers, while an official record quietly turned him into someone he had never been. Renee closed the tablet. "I'm reporting what I saw." "Then you'd better be sure what that decision is going to cost you." She walked toward the flight deck before the fear had a chance to talk her out of it a second time. First Officer David Okafor met her just outside the cockpit door and listened without interrupting once, his face giving away nothing until she finished. "Tell me what you actually saw," he said, "not what you think she meant by it." Renee laid it all out. The repeated demands for identification, the absence of any such demand for Yates, the threat of security, the forced move to the back of the plane, the battery pack that had been available from the very beginning, and the false timestamp sitting in the system for anyone to check. Okafor pulled up the audit log. The sequence sat there in clean, undeniable digital order. The reassignment entry had been created at 6:14 a.m. The conversation with Marcus Holloway had not started until 6:17, 3 full minutes of daylight between a lie and the moment it was supposed to have become true. "Who's got footage?" Okafor asked. Renee pointed him toward Maya Chen's row. Maya unlocked her phone but didn't hand it over. She simply held it up so he could watch. The video filled in everything the paperwork couldn't hide. Marcus's steady voice, Vanessa's questions growing sharper with every answer that failed to produce the excuse she was looking for, and the sentence that closed it. "I am complying under protest," record those exact words, followed immediately by Vanessa's silence and the false entry that came anyway. Okafor carried all 3 pieces back to the cockpit: Renee's account, the time-stamped log, and video no lawyer would ever manage to explain away. Captain Elena Vasquez watched the footage once, read the log twice, and her hand went still over the departure checklist. Dispatch called seconds later. "Captain, we need that door closed. Our slot's closing in 4 minutes. Then we lose the slot," Vasquez said, already unbuckling. "We do not push back on a falsified record." She walked the length of the aircraft herself, past first class, past the quiet murmur of passengers who had gone still watching 4 gold stripes move steadily toward the back of the plane, past row after row until she reached 31C, where a man with tired eyes and careful hands was still smoothing a crease out of the same page. "Mr. Holloway, I'm Captain Vasquez. I need to verify a few things before we go anywhere." He closed the folder. "All right. Did you voluntarily give up seat 2A? No. Did Miss Cole cite any safety, mechanical, or weight and balance reason for the move? No. Were you offered compensation before being told to move? No. Did you raise your voice, threaten anyone, or leave your seat during the conversation? No. Did you say you were complying under protest and ask that it be recorded?" Marcus held her gaze. "I did." Vasquez didn't apologize yet. She had learned, in a much harder room years earlier, that an apology offered before the facts were nailed down was just another way of dodging them. She compared the boarding pass to the manifest, checked the video timestamp against the false entry one more time, and confirmed that the only actual defect on that aircraft belonged to seat 2C. "Your confirmed seat was reassigned without a single valid operational reason," she said quietly. "You should never have been moved. I'm escorting you back myself." Marcus stood, and as he reached for his jacket, the small silver coin slipped from the pocket and struck the floor with a thin metallic click. Vasquez bent and picked it up before he could, turning it once in her palm. The edges were worn nearly smooth. On the back, beneath decades of handling, 6 words were still faintly legible: "Judge the act, not the man." Something moved across her face, not recognition yet, but memory circling closer. She looked at the boarding pass again, then at him, at the stillness in his posture, the measured way he waited for a full question before answering it at all. "General Holloway," she said slowly. "Not today," Marcus said, taking the coin back gently. Today I'm a passenger with a valid ticket. 12 years folded away from Captain Vasquez's face in an instant. She was 29 years old again, sitting in a review room after refusing to fly a transport mission through deteriorating weather with a load close to its structural limit. Her commanding officer had written her up as uncooperative, lacking command presence. The man leading that review had been Brigadier General Marcus Holloway. He had asked for the weather data. He had asked for the load sheet. He had asked for the exact wording of the order she had declined to follow. When the numbers proved her right, he had struck both phrases from her file without ever asking whether her commander had meant well. An evaluation is not a place to store your own discomfort, he had told her then. Now she looked at the word confrontational, typed beside his name on a tablet 28 years later, and the pattern was almost unbearably familiar. A question had become a challenge. A challenge had become a label. A label had quietly replaced the facts. Recognizing him hadn't created the injustice, but it removed every excuse for failing to preserve every version of that manifest, Vasquez told Okafor. Every edit, every timestamp, every crew message. Nothing gets touched. Then she looked toward the front of the plane, where Vanessa Cole still believed this was nothing more than a difficult passenger and an inconvenient delay. This time, when Marcus walked the length of the cabin, nobody looked away. Some passengers lowered their phones, no longer afraid the truth might quietly disappear the moment they stopped filming. Others kept recording anyway, because some of them understood exactly how quickly accountability can evaporate once the cameras go dark. Vanessa stood near the forward galley, tablet clutched to her chest, and her expression hardened the instant she saw who was walking back into first class beside the captain. Preston Yates, still in seat 2A, closed his laptop halfway, sensing the air in the cabin change before he understood why. "Captain, I can explain," Vanessa said quickly. Mr. Holloway became argumentative and refused a reasonable service adjustment. What exact action made him a threat? Vasquez asked, stopping several feet away. He challenged my instruction in front of other passengers. That describes your reaction. I asked what he did. He refused to move when directed. Did he stand over you? No. Did he touch you or another crew member? No. Did he threaten you? Vanessa's grip on the tablet whitened at the knuckles. Not in those exact words. Then what words did he use? The cabin had gone quiet again, that same heavy, breath-held quiet. Vanessa's eyes flicked toward Marcus, as if hoping his presence might supply the intimidation her own report claimed had been there. He stood beside the captain, one bag over his shoulder, posture unchanged from the moment this had all started. He accused me of judging him, Vanessa said. He asked why he was the one being asked to move. A question is not a threat, Vasquez said. Why does the manifest show a voluntary reassignment entered 3 minutes before you ever spoke to him? That could be a clock error, a system glitch. Okafor stepped forward with the log already open. The system clock is synchronized with operations. That entry was created from your device, at your login, 3 minutes before the time-stamped start of your conversation with Mr. Holloway. Why wasn't Mr. Yates asked for identification, or proof of purchase, or confirmation that his seat wasn't an upgrade? Vasquez asked. He's a recognized frequent flyer. Recognition is not verification, Vasquez said. Why wasn't a battery pack offered before a confirmed, paying passenger was removed from his seat? The table also needed repair. Maintenance has already confirmed the latch takes less than 2 minutes to secure, Okafor said. It was the last excuse standing, and it fell as easily as the rest. Maya Chen rose halfway out of her seat, phone still raised. Captain, I have the entire exchange on video, start to finish. Vasquez nodded and let it play. The cabin heard, again, every question about identification, every demand for proof of purchase. The sentence about protecting the first-class experience that had needed no mention of anyone's race, to make its meaning unmistakable to everyone listening. Then came Marcus's voice, calm and unwavering. "I am complying under protest. Record those exact words." "You never wrote that down," Renee said from near the galley, her own voice shaking now, but steady enough to keep going. "You told me to go back to the galley, and you said, if I kept questioning your decision, my name would end up in the crew report." "That is not what I said," Vanessa snapped. "It is exactly what you said." Preston Yates rose slowly from seat 2A, portfolio in hand, the color draining from his face. "I never told anyone to remove him. I assumed the crew would find somebody more flexible." Marcus looked at him steadily. "What made you think I was the flexible one?" Yates opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes moved, almost against his will, over the plain jacket, the worn bag, the ordinary watch, and the answer had been sitting there the entire time, long before either of them had spoken a single word to each other. "I assumed you'd been upgraded," he said quietly. "I never questioned it. Nobody needed to say anything dramatic in response." The admission spoke for itself. It exposed the quiet story. Yates had written about a stranger without ever meeting him. That his seat was probably borrowed. That his claim to it was probably softer. That moving him would probably cost less because his right to be there had never fully registered as real. Vasquez turned back to Vanessa. "You will surrender your tablet. You are relieved from working this cabin for the remainder of the flight. You're turning a service adjustment into a formal investigation." "No," Vasquez said. "Your own report did that." She listed it without raising her voice once. "A falsified consent entry. Unequal verification standards applied to 2 passengers in the same cabin within minutes of each other. A subjective label substituted for any documented behavior, and direct pressure placed on a junior crew member for reporting what she witnessed. You are not safety certified to continue in this role today." Vanessa did not apologize. She insisted, all the way to the jet bridge, that she had only been protecting the experience of a valuable customer. That people were twisting an ordinary decision into something it never was. An airport duty manager and a reserve flight attendant boarded within minutes. Vanessa surrendered her equipment and left the aircraft without another word, walking past seat 2A one final time, glancing at Marcus as if waiting for him to say something victorious. He gave her nothing. He simply sat back down, opened his laptop, and set the small silver coin beside his boarding pass, exactly where it had rested that morning, before any of this had happened. The door closed 41 minutes behind schedule. Before Renee returned to her station, the older passenger from row 6 leaned toward her. "Thank you for checking the facts instead of your own comfort," he said quietly. She nodded and turned away before the tears could catch up with her voice. By the time Flight 482 touched down in Seattle, word of what had happened had already outpaced the aircraft itself. Operations knew a retired brigadier general had been forcibly removed from a confirmed first-class seat. Corporate security had frozen the manifest before anyone could think to edit it. 2 regional executives had already asked, quietly, whether the video might make it onto the news before the airline could get ahead of it. Marcus ignored every message waiting on his phone. He didn't post Maya's footage himself. He didn't call a reporter, threaten a lawsuit, or reach for a single old contact from 30 years in uniform. Instead, he sat in a quiet corner of the arrivals lounge and built something far more dangerous to the people responsible, a record. He listed the boarding time, every demand for identification, the threat of security, the walk to row 31, the false timestamp, and the captain's decision to reverse it all. He attached his receipt, his boarding pass, Maya's original video, and a timeline written in the same clean, dispassionate language he'd once used to close out incident reports that mattered far more than a seat assignment. He named Renee and David Okafor as witnesses, and requested, formally, that every version of the manifest and every internal communication be preserved. At the bottom, In bold, he added one line: "No employee who reported this incident should face any change to schedule, evaluation, or promotion eligibility without independent review." His final sentence was the shortest one in the entire document. The real question isn't why this happened to a retired general. It's how often it happens to people whose names nobody ever bothers to look up. Over the following 6 weeks, Meridian Coast's Legal and Safety Committee reviewed everything, and the deeper they dug, the worse it got. The investigation into Vanessa Cole's history did not stop at Flight 482. 3 years earlier, a 62-year-old retired schoolteacher named Gloria Simmons had been removed from a confirmed first-class seat on a Charlotte to Boston flight to accommodate a business traveler's request to sit beside a colleague. Gloria hadn't raised her voice either. She had shown her ticket, declined politely, and been told the delay was her fault if she kept insisting. Her file had been closed 11 days later, with a note describing her as confused about premium seating rules and a travel credit she never once used. Neither of the 2 witnesses she'd named had ever been contacted. When an investigator finally called her, 3 years after the fact, Gloria was quiet long enough that he checked whether the line had dropped. Then she said, "Someone actually opened my file." The words carried more weight than any complaint she'd ever filed. Marcus was not the first passenger Vanessa Cole had decided could be moved without consequence. He was simply the first whose case arrived with a captain who refused to close a door, a witness who refused to stay quiet, and a digital trail too precise to talk her way around. The investigation found a pattern stretching back years. Passengers of color faced repeated, disproportionate scrutiny. Forced reassignments were consistently logged as voluntary. Junior staff who questioned those entries were quietly warned into silence. Every individual incident had been explained away as an isolated judgment call made under time pressure. The consistency of who received doubt and who received automatic trust told an entirely different story. At the end of the review, Meridian Coast terminated Vanessa Cole's employment, citing falsified passenger consent, unequal application of verification procedures, and retaliation against an employee for accurate reporting. She appealed the decision twice. In the final hearing, facing the unedited video, the timestamped log, Renee's statement, and Gloria Simmons's reopened file laid out side by side, she finally stopped insisting she had done nothing wrong. She admitted quietly that she had seen a well-dressed white executive and a black man in a plain jacket sitting in the same cabin, and had decided, without ever examining why, whose comfort mattered more. It was the only apology she offered, and it came only once every alternative explanation had run out. The airline's Aviation Authority Review Board suspended her flight operations safety certification for 3 years, and no competing carrier would touch her file once the investigation became public record. The airline announced 3 policy changes without burying them inside a vague corporate statement. Any voluntary seat reassignment would now require the passenger's own confirmation entered on the service device, not the crew's. Incident reports could no longer rely on subjective labels. They had to describe observable, specific behavior, and any crew member could report directly to a captain or to operations whenever the person in question was their own supervisor. Renee Alvarez kept her schedule and her route bids, in writing, protected from retaliation. Gloria Simmons received a formal apology, reimbursement, and an invitation to speak at the airline's new training program for cabin crew. Marcus was offered lifetime premium status and a substantial travel credit. He declined both, in a single sentence. Don't build a private remedy for the passenger whose case happened to embarrass you. Use that money to reopen the complaints from people you found it easier to ignore. Meridian Coast agreed, and funded an independent review of every unresolved first-class complaint filed in the previous 5 years. Weeks later, Gloria Simmons called him. She didn't thank him for saving her. She thanked him for making the airline finally read what had been sitting in a file the entire time. 6 months after Flight 482, Marcus stood at a podium in Seattle again. This time in front of a fresh audience of aviation safety officers and airline executives, delivering the same speech he'd carried onto that plane the first time. Except now the case study on his slides had a very specific shape. He'd stripped it of every identifying detail before the talk began. No names, no race, no rank, no mention of a captain who used to sit in his review room 28 years earlier. The first slide simply showed a confirmed first-class ticket. The second showed a different passenger with a genuinely broken outlet and a loose tray latch. The third listed every available solution that had existed from the very first minute. A battery pack, a 2-minute repair, or simply leaving the original passenger exactly where he already belonged. "Don't tell me what you think somebody intended," Marcus told the room. "Tell me what the facts actually require." A safety director in the third rows said the ticketed passenger should never have been moved for another traveler's convenience. A union representative said the junior employee who reported it needed ironclad protection. Within 15 minutes, the entire room had reached the same conclusion Captain Vasquez had reached on the tarmac in Charlotte. The seat belonged to the person who paid for it. The defect had a 2-minute fix, and the label typed onto that manifest had replaced a set of facts that never supported it in the first place. Only then did Marcus set the original boarding pass down on the table under the lights. "The passenger in that seat was me," he said. The room went completely still. He didn't mention 28 years of service or the star he'd once worn on each shoulder. None of that had ever made the ticket valid in the first place. "The seat was mine, before any of you knew my name," he said. Respect is supposed to work exactly the same way. That evening, an email arrived from Preston Yates. He wrote that he had spent months turning the moment over in his mind, that he had told himself, over and over, that he'd never actually asked anyone to be removed, and that the excuse had let him avoid the much harder truth. He had looked at a stranger's clothes and his quiet manner, and decided, without a shred of evidence, that the seat probably hadn't really been his to begin with. "I benefited from an assumption I never once bothered to question," Yates wrote. Marcus answered her with a single line. "An apology only means something if it changes your next decision." Before he left the emptied conference hall that night, staff already clearing water glasses and powering down projectors behind him. Marcus picked up the small silver coin from the edge of the podium, closed it in his palm, and slipped it back into his jacket pocket, leaving nothing behind but a photocopy of a boarding pass on the table. Inside his pocket, the coin held its worn, familiar shape, indifferent, as it had always been, to whatever title the person carrying it happened to wear that day. If this story stayed with you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, maybe even yourself, do more than scroll past it. Share it with someone who's ever been asked to prove they belong somewhere they already paid to be. And tell me honestly in the comments, have you ever been in that cabin on either side of that aisle? I read every single answer.